I want to talk to you today about the book of Judges. Today we're looking at a man called Jephthah. Everybody repeat after me, Jephthah. Our message title today is Zero to Hero. We're busy in a series on the book of Judges. It's an amazing book in the Old Testament that follows the book of Joshua. It actually begins with the death of Joshua. What happens is Joshua and the Israelites finally, after 40 years, finally conquer and possess the promised land. They conquer most of it, but they leave the surrounding area still remaining to the enemy kings. And after he dies, there's no leader in Israel to lead them against these oppressive kings. So what God does during this time, he raises up leaders, saviors, deliverers for the people of Israel. He calls them judges. And this is what the book of Judges is all about. The first message we spoke about a guy called Othniel. It means Lion of God. He was the first judge of Israel. And he led the people to conquer their enemy king at the time. After he died, the people of Israel swayed a bit from God and started to worship other gods. And they were oppressed by more enemy kings. Then God raised up another hero, another deliverer, another judge. And his name was Ehud. I like the story of Ehud because he was actually disabled. He was crippled. It says that he was left-handed, which means he could not use his right arm. And yet this man with a disability, with a weakness like that, God still used him to do great things. He actually went and assassinated personally the king of the king of Moab, called Eglon. And then after he died, God raised up a woman. Believe it or not, a woman. In those days, that was unheard of because men always had the authority above women. They were always subject to the man. For the first time, God raises a woman called Deborah to a level and status far above that of any man in Israel. She's not only a judge and a leader of all the men, she's also a prophetess. She receives direct revelation from God and she talks to the people. The most important thing I love about Deborah was the fact that she was a warrior. She kicked butt, man. When the commander of the Israeli army came to her and said, listen, we got to go to war, but I'm not going to go alone. I'm scared. I'll only go if you go with me. Deborah said, fine, let me get my sword. And she went in to the battle herself and she won a great victory for the people of Israel. After she died, although again the people of Israel strayed and started to worship other gods and were oppressed again by the Philistines. And then God, the Midianites, sorry, not the Philistines, the Midianites. And then God raised up another judge and his name was Gideon. We spoke about him last week. When God met Gideon, he was full of fear, lacking confidence, overwhelmed by the situation he was in, being oppressed by the Midianites for so long. But when God encountered him and met him for the first time, he said, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. God didn't call him what he was, he called him what he was going to become. He spoke faith and vision into him. Just like so many of us, we have the gifts and the talents and the greatness deep down inside, but there's no one around us to encourage us and call out those gifts and talents. We should be doing that. Just one word of encouragement can change the direction of a person's life. You can be the one to push that person towards his destiny, just like God done with Gideon. Gideon rose up to become that mighty warrior. He took an army of 300 against an army of 135,000. And he won that victory. But after he died again, the people strayed from God and started to worship other gods. And then God raised up another judge. The judge we'll look at today, and his name is Jephthah. Jephthah with the F. So let's read our introductory verses from the book of Judges. We're reading Judges chapter 11, the first few verses. Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty warrior. We had practiced with this last week. So look at the person next to you and say, you are a mighty warrior. Look at the person on the other side of you, the person you don't like but tolerate, and tell that person, you are a mighty warrior. His father was Gilead, and his mother was a prostitute. Everyone look at the person. No, don't say that. I'm only kidding. We're going to keep it clean. Gilead's wife also bore him sons, and when they were grown up, they drove Jephthah away. You're not going to get our inheritance in our family, they said, because you're the son of another woman. So Jephthah fled from his brothers and settled in the land of Tob, where a gang of scoundrels gathered around him and followed him. Sometime later, when the Ammonites were fighting against Israel, or at least the Gileadites at that time, the elders of Gilead went to get Jephthah from the land of Tob. Come, they said, be our commander so we can fight the Ammonites. So here we introduced to a man called Jephthah. And Jephthah, like many of us, have walked a long, hard road in life. He was rejected by his family, outcasted by society, exiled to another land, to go live all by himself with nothing, penniless. And many of us are in the same position. We kind of directionless, without purpose. We've had a family or environment we've grown up which is a little bit maybe dysfunctional, or some abuse took place, just like he was. He was emotionally, physically abused. Eventually, just kicked out. But what Jephthah done was he rose above his circumstances. He was a mighty warrior. God saw that strength in him. He rose above the circumstances of his environment, and he became that mighty warrior. The reject would become the ruler. He went from 0 to hero. So what I want to do today is just break up the service into 3 parts. We're going to look at the first part, which is called the rebellion of the Israelites against God. Then we're going to talk about the reject. Before Jephthah became the ruler, he was first rejected. And then we're going to close off with our third part called the ruler. So let's look at our first part called the rebellion. And for that we've got to read a couple of preceding verses. The story of Jephthah is found predominantly in chapter 11, but the background, the context of the story is found in Judges chapter 10. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They served the Baals and the Ashtaroths and the gods of Aram, the gods of Sidon, the gods of Moab, the gods of the Ammonites, and the gods of the Philistines. They had a field day with the gods. And because the Israelites forsook the Lord and no longer served him, he became angry with them, and he sold them into the hands of the Philistines and the Ammonites. So at this point, there was no leader to lead them, so they started to stray a bit. And it says they forsook the worship of God. They were monotheistic. It's a word that means they worship one God, as opposed to everybody else in the universe at that time that worshiped many gods. God separated them and said, everyone else is worshiping many gods, not you, Israel. You will worship me and only me. And God has a personal name. Anybody know what that personal name is? Yahweh. That's his personal name. We refer to God as God, but he's actually got a personal name. They gave up the worship of Yahweh. They said, no, Yahweh, we're not going to worship you. We're going to worship the other gods. And man, did they worship other gods. They worshiped any god they could get their hands on, it looks like it. The gods of Moabites, Sidonites, Canaanites, whatever god could come, they started to worship it. And because of that, God actually gave them over to the hands of the Philistines. The 2 gods that we hear about, these Baal and Ashtaroth. These are the 2 chief gods in Canaan at the time. Baal was the male god. He was called the sun god. Ashtaroth was the female counterpart of him. She was the female goddess of the land, and she was called the moon god. So that's what most of the people worship. The Philistines, they worship another god called Dagon. And this guy was actually weird because he was a half man, half fish. Kind of where our folklore of the mermaids might come from. He was half man, half fish. And the word Dagon comes from the Hebrew word for fish. Dacha. Not that Dacha, guys. Another Dacha completely. Another guy's in the back, woo! This is the church to be in. No, not that Dacha. It's Dach, which means fish in Hebrew. And the Philistines were very wicked, man. They were a warlike tribe. They were experts in military and equipment and weaponry. And history tells us that they were actually infamous for their production and consumption of alcohol. Especially beer, to all you beer drinkers out there. They love to drink beer. So take these 3 things. They were a vicious, warlike tribe, and you mix in a bit of dacha and a bit of beer, and you got yourself a messed up party, I'm telling you that. And this was the guys that were against Israel at the time. They were the guys that were invading and terrorizing them for many, many years. And eventually they cried out to God, and God first gave them up. He said, no, you guys have forsaken me, I'm going to punish you, and he left them. But God's actually got a soft spot for Israel, a soft heart and a soft spot. You'll see that all through the Bible. God always goes back and says, you know, I love you guys, fine, I'll forgive you. And he raises up for them a judge called Jephthah. But before he could rule, he was first rejected. So let's look at that part. Let me just show you a map before we go on. I like showing you maps to get a geographical context of where we're talking about. The Philistines will be here. And the Philistines is a Hebrew word, Philistia. To the Greek, Palestia. To the English, Palestine. Put up your hand if you've heard of Palestine. That is where Palestine is today. The Gaza Strip. Still there today after these years. The Amorites are there and the Ammonites are here. So these are the guys that are currently attacking. Jephthah, the man we're talking about, is in Gilead. So that's the geographical context of what these guys are fighting here. inland. These guys would come in this side, and they were all out war against the enemy. They had no leader to lead them, so God raised up a man called Jephthah. And we're going to look at the rejection. So let's read a couple of verses. This is the one we actually opened our service with. We're going to read that again. Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty warrior. Say mighty warrior. His father was Gilead, his mother was a prostitute. Gilead's wife also bore him other sons, and they were grown up. And they drove Jephthah away. You're not going to get our inheritance in our family, they said, because you are son of another woman, a prostitute. So Jephthah fled from his brothers and settled in the land of Tob, where a gang of scoundrels gathered around him and followed him. The name Jephthah is very unique. Jephthah, pronounced with the F's. Jephthah means the God who opens, the God who sets free, or the God who breaks through. Isn't that an awesome name? The God who opens, the God who sets free. It comes from a Hebrew word. In the English it's Jephthah, but in the Hebrew, in the original Hebrew, you would call him Jephthah. Jephthah. It comes from two Hebrew words. Yahweh, God. So you're already familiar with Yahweh. We've all said Yahweh. Say it again one more time. Yahweh. And the second word is Patah. It means in Hebrew, open. So I'm going to teach you some Hebrew today. You got that? You can go share with your friends afterwards. And just you can go, Shawahu, I know Hebrew. Two words, Yahweh and Patah. Say Yahweh. Say Patah. Put them together. Yahweh, Patah. Say it again. You guys are speaking Hebrew. Well done. Congratulations. It means God opens. God sets free. God breaks through. And this, you're going to see this displayed throughout the life of this man called Jephthah. Jephthah, it says two things about him. He was a mighty warrior. That's pretty good. He was brave. He was a warrior. He was in battle. He was confident and bold. The other thing it says about him is that he was the son of a prostitute. Not so good. Mighty warrior, pretty good. Son of a prostitute, not so good. Alright? So he had these two conflicting things in his life, like many of us. We all got strengths that we can highlight, and there's some skeletons in the closet that we rather want nobody to hear about. Same as Jephthah. And you can imagine him throughout his life being scolded and ridiculed because he was the son of another woman. Gilead, his father, had a wife and other sons. And when he died, the time came to share the inheritance. Have you ever been in a fight like that before? Luckily I have not, but man, when someone dies, the fight is out. And everybody comes crawling out of the woodworks to get their share of the money. I'm glad when my dad died, he died with nothing, not a penny to his name. So we couldn't fight over anything. But Gilead died, and his son said, well, we got the inheritance. Jephthah, you are son of a prostitute. You're not even part of our family. So listen, take your stuff and get the hell out of our house. They kicked him out, rejected him. Here was Jephthah, all these living down the same home of Gilead, now penniless, poverty-stricken, not even a roof over his head, kicked out and exiled to another land that he didn't even know where he was going. Think about how he was brought up in that environment. His father Gilead obviously frequented with prostitutes. This was like his in thing he'd done. His family hated him. His mother obviously hated him because he was a son of another woman. His brothers hated him because he wasn't part of the family. He would be emotionally, even physically abused for most of his life. He'd be humiliated, scolded, mocked at, called, you a loser, son of a prostitute, illegitimate son of Gilead. You'll never amount to anything. Imagine growing up in that environment. And let me tell you that the minds of children are very impressionable, aren't they? And some of us come from families of a little bit of dysfunction, where there's abuse, maybe emotional, physical, maybe substance abuse, maybe you in a family that's surrounded with violence and arguments and fighting all the time, and that impresses greatly upon the young child that's growing up in that environment. And what happens most times is this child grows up and adopts the lifestyle and attitudes of his parents. We see that all the time. You've probably heard it. You're just like your father because he does so and so. You're just like your mother because she does so and so. It doesn't have to be that way. Just because your parents done something to you or around you does not mean that you have to carry that same cycle of sin and habitual sin into your life. You can make the difference. You can make the change. You have the power and opportunity to change your life. And it's not going to be by your strength, it's going to be by the blood of the Lamb. Remember what Jephthah means, the God who sets free. The God who breaks through. You can break that cycle of sin, that generational curse that has followed your family forever and ever. Today the buck stops with you, and you have the power to change that. You're going to say, no God, I'm not going to be like that. I'm going to be different. Jephthah done just that. He did not stoop to the level of their sin. He rose above it, and he said, no, I'm going to become a better man than my brothers, a better man than my father. And that's exactly what he done. But here he was, exiled to the land of Tob. Tob is a beautiful little word. It's T-O-B, but it means good place. And you might think it's odd because, why is it a good place? Think of where he came from. A bad place, a bad environment, bad set of dysfunctional family. He was going to a much better place, a place where he could be free from the tyranny of what was happening in his family life. So here he was in a good place, and it says that a gang of scoundrels gathered around him. And this word we know as something pretty negative. We see it as deceitful, criminal. It's not really. In the original Hebrew, it actually just means unemployed and empty. That's what it means. So obviously there was some criminal element because they were unemployed. They had to look for food and stuff. So there was some criminal, deceitful element around there. But that's not what the word means. They were just a bunch of guys that were down and out. Probably also exiled from their town for being misfits, outcasts, sons of prostitutes. And they all gathered in this place called Tob. And there they were sitting down, and they saw this guy Jephthah walking. And man, the Jephthah was in the same boat as them, unemployed, penniless, also outcasted, but yet they saw something in him, because immediately it says they gathered around him and followed him. Now the Bible doesn't say what they saw in him, but I think they saw strength in him. Strength and courage. They knew this guy was like a mighty warrior, even without talking to him. And I think they saw something more important. They saw purpose. They saw purpose in him because they were empty. They were without direction, without purpose in their life. They saw this man, and this guy resonated with purpose. And that purpose came from God Almighty. Because God had a plan for Jephthah, and even though he maybe didn't realize it at the time, other people could see that God had a plan and a purpose for this man Jephthah. And he became the ruler of this ragtag gang of misfits and outcasts. And that was his platform. God was saying, Jephthah, this is part of the plan I have for you. You rule these guys, even if it's 10, 20 guys, you rule them because I've got a plan, and that plan is for you to rule the entire nation. And that's exactly what would happen. Jephthah would become the ruler. So let's read those verses together. Our last concluding point and verses in 11:4-8. It says, sometime later when the Ammonites were fighting against Israel, the elders of Gilead went to get Jephthah from the land of Tob. Come, they said, be our commander and we can fight the Ammonites. I love what Jephthah says. He said to them, didn't you hate me and drive me from my father's house? Didn't you kick me out and now you want me to come back? Why do you come to me now when you're in trouble, when you're in a crisis? The elders of Gilead said to him, nevertheless, we are now turning to you. Come with us and fight the Ammonites, and you'll be head of all of us who live in Gilead. So here they come. This is a guy from Gilead, his own hometown, his own place where he lived. And now the Ammonites, those guys I showed you on that, they're busy attacking the Gileads and the Israelites. And they have a little bit of an army, but they don't have a commander. They don't have someone to lead them. But they know that Jephthah is doing great things in Tob. He's a mighty warrior. He's already got a little army around him. He's already a leader of a force that he's probably built up. So what they do is they go to Tob. Hey, Jephthah, how you doing, buddy? Wow, you're looking good. Long time no see, man. Listen, we're in a little bit of a pickle. We got this enemy attacking us, and we'd really like it if you come and fight for us. And what does he say? He says, didn't you kick me out? Weren't you the same dudes that kicked me out of my house and sent me penniless, running? And now you want to come back and you want to ask me to fight your war for you? He could have said to hell with you, but he didn't. Again, he didn't stoop to their level. He didn't carry a chip on his shoulder and get better. He rose above it and got better. There's two people in life. Those that grow old and get better, or those that grow up and get better. He was the latter. He decided, listen guys, let me get this straight. If I come back with you and fight this battle, I will be your boss. They said, yeah. I'll be your ruler. Yeah, you're ruler of all of us. And this was it, the breakthrough point of all those years, living in time in exile, living with the ragtag team of outcasts and misfits. This was his breakthrough point. God finally showed his name to be the God of the breakthrough. And that mold was broken off, and he rose up and became the ruler of Israel. The reject became the ruler. He went from 0 to hero. But you can't help but think of his life he lived. Living in that environment, in his household, with those people constantly calling him names. Loser, son of a prostitute, illegitimate son, never amount to anything. It was almost like they were putting labels on him, wasn't it? And so often we have the same thing happen in our life. We have people in our life that are putting labels on us, telling us what we can and cannot do, what we do or do not have. Too slow, too old, too short, not talented, not smart. What are they doing? Putting labels on us. Just like Jephthah, he had to decide, is he going to stoop to that level, or is he going to become better? Is he going to move forward with God? The only way you're going to move forward with God, rise to the next level of your destiny, your purpose, the reason why you're on this planet, is when you start removing those labels. Because those labels don't define you. Let me tell you, people don't define your destiny, God does. He has you and your plan in the palm of his hand, and no man on this planet can take that away from you. No matter who you are, family, mother or father, teacher, counselor, coach. Ooh. No offense to the coach, Darby. Welcome, Darby. I love you, Darby. These guys are all like 10 foot tall. They're far bigger than me. But if you put labels on each other, and the only way you're going to go to the next level, the only way you're going to see breakthrough in your life is when you remove those labels. And you start declaring over your life what God has said about you. And that's the most important thing. And God says, you are redeemed, you are restored, you're saved and sealed and secured, you are empowered, anointed. You are blessed beyond your wildest dreams. You are a mighty warrior. That's what God says about you. That's biblical. What we got to start doing is removing those labels that people have put on us. Not smart, not talented, never amount to anything, a loser. It's only once we start removing those labels, and that's up to you. That's not God's job. You got to do that. God will come through. He'll be the God of the breakthrough. But you got to do your part. You got to first remove the old labels and start declaring God's truth over your life. I read a story about this man that was told by his high school counselor that he was not smart and not talented. So when he gets a job, he should focus on low-level skill jobs. What was this counselor doing? Putting labels on him. Not smart, not talented, never amount to much. He didn't know any better. So he wore these labels year after year. This was ingrained in his thinking, in his attitude, in his life. When he got a job in a factory, and he stayed at the lowest level job for years and years. Until that factory closed. And he went across town to another company, another factory to look for a job. The company policy was that every new applicant had to take an IQ test. He took the IQ test. The results came back that he was at the genius level. The owner of the company called him and said, "What are you doing applying for this low-level job? You have the highest IQ in the 63-year history of this company." That day, a stronghold was broken in his mind. That day, he removed the labels that held him back for 17 years. That day, he saw his breakthrough. Just like Jephthah, it doesn't happen overnight. Just like for this man, it took many years, but the time came when he removed the labels and God broke through in his life. This man went on to start his own company, his own factory, and he invented his own things and patented, and today they're still used in the marketplace. That is what God does when he comes through for you. But you got to do your part. What am I saying? People don't dictate your destiny. It doesn't matter what your teacher or your counselor, your mother or father or friends say about you. What matters is what God says about you. And you've got to let that sink in today. Tear off those old labels. Loser, not smart. That is not who you are. You have gifts and strengths in you that you have not even yet encountered. And once you walk with God and ask Him to reveal these gifts and His talents, He will take you places you've never ever been. Just like with Jephthah. He'll take you from the background and He'll put you into the forefront when you'll be a person of influence. Just like with Jephthah, He'll take the reject and make you a ruler. And yes, He will turn the 0 into a hero. Amen. Amen.